Hi, welcome back to day 3. Today we're moving on to the second part of what was shared in Mike's original question. And it's just a short piece, and it's going to be mostly today about language and getting clarity on what we mean by different words, some of which we started pointing to in the last video. But this will just kind of bring together the different bits of language in terms of what was shared yesterday. So what was said in the original question is this: the idea of a no self, real self, or removing a separate self is perhaps also an attempt to do this, i.e. to maintain this, the same narrative, to maintain the mirage or the illusion. Some self or no self that will continue in another form without being a problem. So kind of saying that whatever we're doing, it's really just things are going to just change form so that they stop being an issue, stop being a problem. So let's just start with some clarity of language, because there's brilliant bringing in of different phrases that get used in this exploration and which can create confusion if we don't get clear on what we mean. So I'm going to start with removing a separate self. If you listened yesterday, you'll probably already have a sense of this, and do go back to that one if you haven't watched it yet. But removing a separate self is impossible, because there is no separate self. The feeling of a separate self, the experience of a separate self, when looked at and when inquired into, is found to be that collection of thoughts which had been cobbled together to make it look as though there was a complete jigsaw puzzle. But when looked at closely, there's just a bunch of ever-changing thoughts which reference me, but there's no me, there's no entity, separate self me to be found. And so the separate self can't be removed because it doesn't exist. The separate self is the feeling when we identify with the jigsaw puzzle pieces. When we stop identifying with the jigsaw puzzle pieces, which happens all day, every day, coming and going into the belief in separation and then not, belief in separation and then not. So the separate self isn't being removed because it doesn't exist. It's just that the belief in that being who I am comes and goes. I believe I'm a separate self, I don't. I believe I'm a separate self, I don't. And notice that I am the one who is here doing the believing or not. I am the constant, which in the first video I pointed to the fact there is one self. That is who I am, and who is believing I'm a separate self or is not. So, and that then kind of speaks to the second one. So Mike used 3 phrases here. The removing separate self was actually the last one, so I'm working backwards through these. So the second one was the real self, which is all that I am. So if I am aware of the belief in these thoughts and the feeling of being a separate self, and I'm aware of the absence of that, the real self is the one that is here through both of these experiences, through all of these experiences we've ever had. So there is a real self, or an essential self, that I am. And when that's inquired into and investigated, that's found to be what sometimes could be referred to in relation to the first phrase that Mike shared, no self. Because when we look and see who is it that I am that is aware of the belief in separation and is aware of the absence of that belief, when that I is looked at closely, which doesn't take very long, it's not a difficult process. Well, it's very simple. The more the mind's involved, the more difficult it feels, but it's a very simple recognition of the fact of being aware. That is the essential and real truth of ourself. And when we look at that, when we explore the nature of that self, we find that there is nothing, no thing of objective form there. There's no measurement, there's no colour, there's no movement, there's no edge. There's no sense of coming or going. People describe it as peaceful, still, content, calm, quiet, like home. That's the real self, which can be described as no self because there's no objective form there. So it appears, well, there is no thing there, and therefore it can look like there's no self. There is a self. Check for yourself right now. You can say, I am here, I am alive, I am aware. So there is something that you are. So to say there is no self can be a tricky phrase, because I know there is something I am. And so the no self at best can point to the fact there is no objective quality to the truth of who I am, to my essential nature. And we can certainly say there is no separate self, because that was just that collection of thoughts which is either believed or not, and therefore cannot be removed because there's not a thing. So we could say there is no separate self, and we can say that the real self, the essential self, is no thing. It is not of form. It is not an object. So these different phrases, actually, where Mike's saying here, perhaps this is also an attempt to maintain this protection and defense. That's not my experience. To me, the more we look at this closely, that is the falling away, like I described in the last video. The more we see that this jigsaw puzzle belief set is not who I am, and that there's something I am, which is everything I've been looking for. That is exactly the route through. And so in terms of whether it continues in another form without being a problem, yes, the thoughts can continue about me, about my preferences, about what I like or don't like. But knowing who I am, I no longer need to identify with these or secure myself in these in order to be okay, in order to survive. Because I know my nature. And yeah, these preferences are cool. It makes life interesting. So yes, these thoughts continue without a problem, because I'm no longer identifying with them, and I'm no longer seeking to secure myself in them. I'm no longer attached to them for my well-being, because I know that I am well-being. And these are just part of my experience. So let's leave that one there today, and we'll come to part 3 tomorrow, part 4 even, because part 3 is today. Part 4 tomorrow, where we'll come to the final question which Mike had asked. All right, so I look forward to seeing you then.